everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're back. We've had a few months off and we're back with a brand new series of events, and we're absolutely delighted to be kicking off our new events with Jennifer Johnston, who's here today. So hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
So just as usual, if you're new to our events, I'll just give a little rundown of what we usually do. So the first half hour of this event will be a question and answer session between myself and Jennifer about her life and her career, and any tips you can provide for any young people wanting to pursue this. And then during that time, if you just remain muted so we don't get any audio interruptions, that's brilliant. But if you have any questions for Jennifer, you can just put them in the chat box, and then there'll be time at the end for you to actually ask them questions. So yourself, you can unmute yourself, and that way it's more personal and you get to have a good chat. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And here is Jennifer's bio. I'm going to read it out as always.
Embarrassing.
Okay. A lot of clang-worthy material in every bio. I'm always very much in awe. So here we go. Universally known as the Diva, celebrated British mezzo-soprano Jennifer Johnston is the winner of the Royal Philharmonic Society's Singer Award 2021, a former BBC New Generation artist, and to quote Prospect magazine, has one of the most generous and beautiful voices in the business. Featuring an iTunes #1 hit single You'll Never Walk Alone with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra and Choir, for whom she was artist in residence, her debut solo album, A Love Letter to Liverpool, is a deeply personal and affectionate tribute to her native city and the place she calls home. She is the creator of Notes from Musicians' Kitchens, cookbook and podcast, and the producer of Bite-Sized Proms, both raising funds for Help Musicians UK. Particularly well known for her interpretations of the works of Mahler and Elgar, career highlights have included over 50 performances on the world-famous stage of the Bayerische Staatsoper in Munich, appearing at the first night of the proms with the BBC Symphony Orchestra in Janacek's Glagolitic Mass, forming the iconic role of Jocasta in Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex with Sir John Eliot Gardiner and both the Berlin Philharmonic and London Symphony Orchestras, and singing in Britain's The Turn of the Screw at La Scala in Milan. Unafraid of contemporary repertoire, notable appearances have included Lady de Haute Desert in Paris and Berchtesgaden at the Salzburg Festival, Thomas Ades's Totentanz, with the composer conducting the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, and Pasqualita in John Adams' Dr. Atomic with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by the composer himself, the recording of which was nominated for a Grammy Award. Her extensive discography includes Anthony Payne's arrangement of Vaughan Williams' Last Songs with the BBC Symphony Orchestra under Martin Brabant, commissioned especially for her by the BBC, which she premiered at the BBC Proms and was nominated for a Grammy Award. Oof, wow. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you
so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So first of all, how are you doing? We're all getting back on our feet now as we emerge from this pandemic. What have you been up to?
Yeah, it's been a bit weird, I have to be honest. When you look back over the past 18 months, I think most people feel a sort of sense of almost disbelief, really, because it feels like the world's reopening now, and yet nothing feels the same as it did before. So I think there is a real set of issues still to be dealt with, one of which is that I wouldn't be surprised if Europe goes back into lockdown relatively quickly. So we're hovering in a position where I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen. Professionally though, I think most big organizations are reopening in some way. But as I say, it remains to be seen whether any of that's affected moving forwards. What is affected is I would say the amount of stuff going on. There's a lot less than there would normally be at this time of year. It tends to be sort of banner events. Yes, I wouldn't say it feels normal life again yet.
Well, you certainly managed to cope well during the pandemic in terms of creating opportunities for other musicians with your bite-sized proms and coming up with the Notes from Musicians' Kitchen. So I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit about that and what instigated this and how it came to be.
I think the thing about both projects is that both of them popped into my head fully formed, including the name. So I literally just got on with it, but I was very lucky that, particularly with bite-sized proms, I literally had to have a whole team doing that, because there were 250 musicians involved. So it wasn't just me. I might well have been leading it, but I can't take much credit in terms of the tech stuff in particular. Both projects were designed to firstly raise money for Help Musicians UK, but they were also to try and galvanise the musical community who are stuck at home, very fed up and feeling a bit helpless, really. And it was great to see people willing to be involved, but also getting back to work and starting to find their way back to their art again. And so it was a lovely thing. But it feels like quite a long time ago now as well, strangely. So time just doesn't feel like it's passing in normal terms. It's a very strange environment.
Mm-hmm. Completely understand that. And I suppose it was a lifeline for a lot of people, that having had it just taken away from us so abruptly. So yeah, well done for that, and obviously well done again on your RPS win, which is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
A little insight perhaps also into how you emerged into this career. Did you know from a young age, as a young girl in Liverpool, that you wanted to be a classical singer, as a professional singer,
not really.
Something that
not really. I think from when I was about 7, singing was always there. I was, in the church choir, and then onwards into school and doing solos and the like. I, however, was determined that I was going to be a barrister. So I actually, when I went to Cambridge University, I read law firstly, rather than music. In fact, I don't even have music GCSE, let alone A-level or anything like that. And then when I was 15, I auditioned for the National Youth Choir and I didn't get in. So somebody said to me, "Oh, why don't you go and join the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Choir?" So I did. And that was my sort of first taste of high-level professional classical music, really. And then when I arrived at Cambridge, it was with a choral scholarship, but my voice changed a huge amount between when I auditioned and when I actually turned up to start my first term. And I was so loud that after a year I basically got kicked out of the choir because they couldn't cope with me. And it was definitely the right thing, but it was hard at the time. And I was in the end so busy with law, and also I ran the university's opera society by the time I was in my 3rd year. And I did my first opera when I was at Cambridge with somebody else who was doing his first opera too, conducting Edward Gardner, who's now the LPO's chief conductor. So we find that quite funny now looking back, because by rights it shouldn't have worked out this way. But I did then become a barrister, so I wasn't really intending singing to happen, but a weird series of events happened, and I ended up singing at this massive legal wedding at which Sir Stephen Clearbury was attending, and I'd known all the time I was a student, and he'd said, "I don't understand why you're not singing." And I said, "Well, I hadn't really thought about it." And he said, "Well, if you do think about it, why don't you let me coach you, and why don't you apply to the Royal College of Music or whatever?" And I had a singing teacher, Lillian Watson, who is still my singing teacher now, and she hit the roof and she said, "Don't be ridiculous, you're not ready." But I said, "Well, I'll give it a go anyway, because I've got nothing to lose, have I?" And she sort of rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, all right then." And then I went for the auditions, was given a full scholarship to the Royal College of Music. So I said to my chambers, "I'm not coming back for a year, but I don't know after that." So they said, "That's fine, just you decide." And then I never went back to the bar. So it was a bit of an accidental thing, really, strangely, now looking back.
That's
so
brilliant.
Yeah, very different from most other people.
Yeah, and it just goes to show just how many different routes there are into this industry. In fact, I can see a few RNCM friends are on here, but there are certain colleagues of mine that have done academic undergrads that are completely unrelated to music, but have somehow found this love of it and joined later on, and that's completely okay. So
there's lots of
find
there were lots of us from Cambridge who did other degrees who've ended up singing. I mean, Yeston Davies didn't do a music degree. I can't think who else off the top of my head, but there's lots of us that came from certainly a different academic undergraduate background. But I was the only person I knew that had gone and taken my professional level qualifications to the level that I was. I mean, I was a tenant in a chambers in London, and most people would kill for that. So I think quite a lot of people thought I was absolutely mental giving it up. But in the end, it was just the right thing for me. I mean, it's like when James Gilchrist stopped being a doctor, same thing. So there are plenty of routes, but going to Conservatoire is a fairly important step, I would say, particularly at the moment. Life at the Royal College of Music was a bit up and down, has to be said. And I didn't particularly enjoy feeling like I was at school again. But it gave me massive opportunities, not least I was signed by my agent in the first term at college. I again had a really freaky set of things happen, like turning up as a normal postgrad and then being cast in the college opera over people in the opera school by Sir Thomas Allen in his directorial debut. He was doing Albert Herring, and of course the world and their dog were watching because it was him. And so it ended up that obviously lots of agents came and then Askenas Holt signed me there and I'm still with them. So it's what happened to me isn't standard at all in any way. I think there are far many more people who take a far much more conventional route into it all.
Yeah, we were just having this discussion because really that is quite a rare thing to be signed so young. First term, it's absolutely brilliant, and these days it does seem to be more of a methodical approach to then being signed, because some people either go for like small agencies to start off then change, or some people decide not to have an agent at all in the first place, don't they? So these days, from your perspective, what would you say singers are doing?
Agents just don't do that anymore. Even when it happened to me, it was still relatively exceptional. That said, it happened more often, and I think what was notable is it wasn't just Askenas I was offered, it was others as well. So now I can't imagine it happening. I think you have to have really got to start either on a young artist program at an opera house or via winning various competitions. I think there's a very different environment currently. And I think part of that is risk. I mean, agents have been hit very hard during the pandemic. And I think now that they will only sign people if they feel that they've got a viable career, because they have to invest quite a lot in each of their artists. And it's only worth doing that now if they see a big future. And I think in big agency terms, it's that they see a big future, that they can send you off all over the world to work at top level. If they don't think that you'll quite make it that much, like to that level, they won't be inclined to bother. It's a bit more ruthless, I would say. Whereas when I was younger, it was more about whether you had the potential and the promise to get there. And they would be happier to develop. But it's just, I mean, the whole world is different now, but the classical music industry is different now, for lots of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. And also, just looking through your biography, it shows that you've clearly got an affinity with Elgar and Mahler. I mean, we all love Elgar and Mahler. Could you just tell me a little bit more about your repertoire choices throughout your career, your recording career, and then kind of interest in contemporary music, and perhaps whether we should all be dipping our toes into it, because we are encouraged at Conservatoire, but a lot of us do.
Yeah, there's a lot of reluctance, I think. Well, I mean, firstly, in terms of sort of general repertoire choices, I think it surprises people when they discover that very often, even when you get to my age, that a lot of the time choices are sort of made for you in a way, because it's dependent on what you're offered. So it's dependent on what people perceive you to be. And I think even when I was at the Royal College, I did my first Mahler 2 with Bernard Haitink while I was still a student and at the Royal College. And so it was already a stake in the ground, really. And I've now done I think it's 68 at the last count of them. So I think it's not really an arguable thing. Apart from the pandemic, I can't remember a season where I haven't done Marla 2 plus other stuff. So whether it be Das Lied von der Erde, Marla 3, Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen also, and so on. So even the Rocket Leader, there's lots of it. And then obviously it's like anything, once you get known to doing a certain thing or a certain group of things, there's a logic there. Most casting directors or planning people at orchestras, once they know you're a Mahler person, then the natural habitat is Mahler, Elgar, Wagner. So it's just, none of that is shocking to anybody, I don't think. And so it's a voice type thing. It's harder when you've got a bigger instrument. I mean, I really do. I mean, my voice sounds deceptive on recordings. I think people think I'm a lighter voice until they hear me live. And then you hear that I can fill a space like the Albert Hall without any effort. And I think that's the point really, is that in order to sing this kind of repertoire, I mean, particularly for Elgar, the orchestra is enormous. I mean, Sea Pictures is the biggest I can think I sing with when it's done in full score. And it's just not possible to put a lighter voice into that context. You just wouldn't be heard. So I think as I've got older, I've become more and more comfortable with just being open about what I like and who I am. But again, it's definitely been guided by other people perceiving my voice type as a very particular thing. And then you asked about recordings again, they're a bit accidental really. It feels there's never a plan. Projects come up and you say yes or no. The only one that I planned myself was my own A Love Letter to Liverpool disc, which came out of my residency with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, and was really about not even raising money. It was about raising awareness of both the work of the Liverpool Phil and the youth company, and then in terms of the work in general in the city of Alderhay Children's Hospital. So it wasn't really designed as supposed to be a big project, but then You'll Never Walk Alone from it went to #1 in the charts because Liverpool Football Club took it on as their Champions League single, and then the album itself was in the top 5 in the classical chart, in the big classical charts, not even the specialist one. So it was really great. It was very unexpected. So all very nice. And what was the third? There was one other thing you asked. I can't think.
Temporary rep.
Oh, yes. I was taught at the Royal College of Music by the amazing Jane Manning, who very sadly died a few months ago. Jane was incredible, and there was a little group of us that were more interested and more willing than others to be brave, and I just got on with her, and I started to do stuff even then, and took on a few quite unusual projects. I performed Berrios O King in college with the contemporary ensemble, and then I also did an Andreessen piece for Andreessen himself while I was at college. And I think it sort of unlocked the door, really. It sort of showed me that actually, in the end, it's just blobs on a page. You just have to learn it. So then when the call came for the likes of Salzburg Festival for the Burt Whistle, I'd already made my debut at the festival, so that didn't scare me. I should have been a bit scared. I said yes without looking at the score, which was a bit daft. But I looked at who'd done it before at Covent Garden, and I thought, oh, I'm fine, because actually it's somebody with the similar voice type to me. And actually it was completely fine. It was just the hardest thing I've ever had to learn. So did I regret it? Possibly. I'd like to say it was a great experience, but the production was absolutely mental, with real dogs on stage and dust, and I was in a costume made of real moss, and I looked like a piece of broccoli. So yeah, it was great. So me and Sir John Tomlinson looked genuinely hilarious. Those photos are on my social media somewhere if you want to scroll through at some point to look for them.
Yeah. Yes, most definitely will.
Yeah.
On our advertising pictures for tonight.
Yeah, no, no.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant. And then also, staying true to your hometown of Liverpool, you do a lot with the cathedral there, and you work with the choristers in residence. So what's it like teaching and just nurturing younger voices?
It's a very mixed bag, I find. I've got choral scholars who are postgrads, apart from one postgrads, who are all applying for Conservatory or musical theatre this coming year. And then I have the choristers who are between the age of generally about 10 to 18. They are, as you'd expect with 50 of them, there's a whole mixture of personalities and interests, some more committed than others, I find, some more shy than others. And so it basically is just a question of I've had to get to know them all. And I think that's the key with teaching, really. I think you just have to deal with what's in front of you. They had a bit of a shock, I think, having an opera singer suddenly appear in their midst, because firstly, I'm a lot more vocal than I think other singing teachers, just because that's the part of the industry I come from. I don't mince my words, because that's how we deal with music, and there's no time usually to mess around. But equally, they've loved it, because actually I am able to sing stuff that they won't have heard before, and they think it's hilarious when I actually open my mouth. They're always quite shocked by how much noise I can make. So yeah, it's a great pleasure. And the nice thing for me is that it's very much a sort of it's just such a different environment from everything else that I do. I think church music is very underrated with young voices. They're all learning a lot all the time, and it's setting them up very well for applying for Oxbridge choral scholarships, amongst other things. So there's lots going on, and they're also very well looked after. So they have piano and theory lessons as well as their singing lessons. And then we also have a wellbeing program. So I do physicality as well as they learn to cook, and there's a whole massive load of stuff that they do. So it's a really good program. We don't have a choir school, they all come from a whole range of schools, but they're expected to give a huge commitment to the cathedral. So in return, we give them everything we can. So it's all good, particularly given the cuts to music in schools at the moment. So
definitely, it's vital, really, and it helps them have those building blocks into joining large choirs and, like as you said, Oxbridge.
Yeah, and it's a real team effort in the end. My colleagues are brilliant at what they do as well. I have real respect for all of them, and of course one of them is Ian Tracy, who is very famous as an organist, but he's also the conductor of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Choir. So there's a natural feed in. I also work with the Liverpool Phil Choir myself. I go in and do workshops with them and the youth company. So it's a nice musical community here, and it doesn't exist that many places. So it's quite a nice thing to be involved in it like that.
Definitely, and it's almost like you've gone around and helping out a little community start you off in your career, isn't it? And
I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, because obviously in Manchester we have the Halle, and they do outreach to some schools throughout the northwest, but not everywhere in the northwest, particularly in Merseyside, have access to things like this. So it's bridging that out and encouraging people to get into this, which is brilliant. So.
Yeah, it is, and we're very lucky. We are anyway UNESCO City of Music, which does make a difference. But also because the Liverpool Phil has such an incredible structure for education and outreach, that's one thing. But they also have the big In Harmony program. So In Harmony go into primary schools and teach instruments to groups of students, and it's been very successful. It's modelled on the El Sistema method from Venezuela. So it's multi-layered, but it's all good.
Brilliant. And before we move on to our audience questions, I was just wondering, coming back to present day now, do you have any exciting plans in the bag that you're allowed to disclose with us right now? Anything?
Well, it's a bit strange at the moment because I've got stuff in my diary I can't say anything about because everybody's announcing everything so very late. What I do know, unless there's any lockdowns in Germany, is that next week I'm back to home, which is the Bayerische Staatsoper. So I've got Die Tote Stadt in the next few weeks, and then in January I start rehearsals for a new production of Peter Grimes there as well. That's my home theatre at the moment. I've been there for almost 10 years, and so it's a bit odd. I've missed 4 productions over the past 18 months, and that's because they either didn't happen or I couldn't get there. Brits weren't allowed into Germany for a while, so it's a bit strange. It'll feel very odd going back because the costume for Torchestadt is the last costume I wore on stage before the lockdown started. So it'll feel like I've really come full circle when I get back. I just hope it fits. I'm a little bit fat after lockdowns still. So yeah, Corona Stone is definitely a thing.
Well, talking about the Notes for Musicians kitchens, how did you find that? Who did you get involved with it? Were they all your own recipes?
Well, no. It's, if you look at it carefully, every recipe has come from a well-known musician, and they're all my friends, all my colleagues. There's all sorts of people in there, including Stephen Huff, another Scouser, and Vasily Petrenko, the conductor who has just left Liverpool, and the like. So there's some Liverpool connections there, and then people like Natalie Stutzmann, who's conductor and contralto, and oh my God, Erin Morley. There's all sorts of people. And a lot of them just are my pals. And I just said, oh, come on, cough up. Jamie Barton, I said, Jamie's a brilliant cook. So she's always inventing stuff. So I said, right, come on, you write me a recipe down. And everyone was great about it. And they loved doing it. So even better.
Oh, brilliant. And how can anyone listening today, how can they listen to those? Is it available on like Spotify?
So the recipes themselves are in a digital cookbook, which is online, and it notesfrommusicianskitchens.com. And then the podcast is just available across all platforms, so like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and the like.
Brilliant. We'll check those out. I've had a few questions sent privately because they can't read it out. The first one is what is your favourite venue to perform in?
I'd say for concerts, I love the Liverpool Phil, but that's because it's home and it's a totally different feeling from any other for me. Carnegie Hall has an amazing acoustic. The Royal Albert Hall never fails to make my stomach drop out when I have to walk on stage and it's full in the proms. Every prom I've ever done in there is sold out, so it's really quite intimidating. And I don't know how it would feel at the moment. I haven't done a prom since the beginning of the pandemic, but before that, it's 6,000 people basically when it's full, so mental. I personally, though, if you're talking about like pure love of the acoustic for no other reason, but also the way it looks, I actually think the Severance Hall in Cleveland, Ohio is just jaw-dropping. It's quite extraordinary. And that's why the Cleveland Orchestra, who I love working with, have such an incredible string sound. And it's now worldwide known because it's so amazing. And then in opera, I would have to say Bayerische Staatsoper and La Scala, because they're the two theatres I've worked most in. How lucky am I? I feel ridiculous sometimes saying these things. They're both incredibly different. La Scala is just a wall of little boxes. The loggia that are in front of you are it's such a famous theatre in terms of the way it looks. But Bayerische Staatsoper is amazing, incredible acoustic and really beautiful. So mixture really. Hope that helps.
Thank you. The second question we've got in is, how important have industry contacts from your time at UCT or / in training been for your career?
I'd say a mixture, probably. I mean, obviously, because I was signed by an agent so early, they didn't need to be my contacts as such. they open a lot of doors simply because they market you or whatever. My singing teacher is still the same now as she ever was. So I've had her since 2001. So I guess if you call her an industry contact, she's pretty crucial. I don't know really. I mean, equally, there'll be people you don't get on with, and you have to just put that aside and move on. So, you know, there's always conductors I haven't got on with, who I'm not going to name, who I will never very happily see the back of and never work with them again. So you just have to take each thing you do and do your best and move on rapidly in some cases. It is what it is. I think what is different is that all the social media now, I mean, until 2.5 years ago, I'd never used Instagram because I didn't know how to use it. And I left Twitter because I hated it, because I just found myself getting wound up by other people all too much. And people are horrible about performers all the time. So that I waved goodbye to that, I'd had enough. But the younger generation, you guys are a lot more engaged on social media than we ever are. My social media is largely about what I'm eating or my cat. There's a bit of professional stuff on there, but I mean, I struggle with the whole putting myself out there in a glossy sort of print way, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it's an interesting one because, as you said, like people in training. So at the minute, I've just started postgrad at RNCM, but I remember during my undergrad, as part of one of the courses, we actually had to learn how to promote ourselves on social media, make websites, make Twitter pages, and in a way to like promote ourselves. And I guess, you know, to an extent, it is necessary. But what would your opinion be of it? Because obviously we're told, you know, you've got to be careful as well that you don't overshare as well. So what would your
well,
thoughts
I think there's a weird mixture, because actually, in terms of the sharing I do, I never write anything personal really, but in terms of sort of engaging with your public, I never feel I have a public, because I think it's healthy not to feel like you're somehow on a pedestal. I've always felt that it's very important to just be myself regardless, which is why I'm sitting here in a hoodie with no makeup on, because that's what I am like every day. I'm not somebody who thinks it's necessary to sort of mask myself and make myself into something different than I truly am, because actually as an artist, that's quite dangerous. You already have to do that on stage. And if you're traveling a lot and if you're not at home a lot, it can be very sort of isolating. And if you don't know who you are, and amongst all of that, anyway, a little bit dangerous in terms of mental health. I've seen quite a few colleagues come a bit of a cropper over the years, partly because they believe their own press, which is always a dangerous thing to do. And I don't know, I just think in our environment, realness, honesty is what transmits to an audience. So the moment that you're fake in any way, you will not get anywhere, because the audience will switch off. So I think in terms of my career, the reason I've been re-employed by places is nothing to do with my social media feed. It's everything to do with my musicality, my preparation, my voice type, and so on. So I think it's dangerous to think that as a career that it's all about social media. I tell you who I think is really good on social media, and I'm sure you probably all follow, is Louise Alder, who's a friend of mine. Yeah. Louise has got the balance absolutely right, but Louise is a sensationally good musician who I've never known anyone work as hard, and she's so good, and she really has the balance quite right, I would say, for her age group. Those of us who are a bit older, I think no, we're not as committed, because that wasn't part of our moving through the earlier parts of our career.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that, because I think it is really important to realise that, especially with the history of this career, it can be really easy to feel like you need to fit into a certain box. you know, to be able to make it, in inverted commas.
Yeah, I'm never a
So
big
I think-
believer in that there's a lot spoken about by conservatoires and the like, which as a professional who's out there doing the job irritates me really, because in reality, being yourself is your best marketing tool. Equally, you don't want to put people off you, but at the same time, if everybody looks the same in auditions and sounds the same and doesn't distinguish themselves in any way, then you won't get anywhere anyway. And a really good example of this is Ella Taylor, who I really admire, their singing, I should say. You don't need to fit in a box that other people want to put you in. What is important is that you know exactly where you fit in terms of repertoire. So I feel like in the UK, very often there's a bit of overcasting that goes on. So people try and tackle things too big too soon. There's also not enough support for bigger voices in the UK. I think that's a generally accepted thing. Just have a look at the industry as a whole, look at people, listen to people on YouTube, actually get a handle on what in the international houses your voice is or would be up against, and use that as a guide, because the guys that really know what they're talking about are those in Paris, Munich, Berlin, London, New York. They're not generally in the smaller houses. It can be quite deceptive. Also, because if it's a smaller physical theatre, they can cast different voices. But part of your work as a student should be really getting to know who is out there at the moment singing all over the place. What are the voices to watch, and so on.
It's very interesting because I've had a few friends go to European young artist programs and want to audition with pieces by Wagner, and they're in their 20s, and they say that if they were to do that in England, that would get a big no-no, but if they were to do that abroad, and that would be acceptable. So
no, not necessarily. Wagner is a particular thing, really. The danger is once you step into it, it's very hard to step out. And so I was asked by the Bayerische Staatsoper to audition with Wagner, because that was going to be, and ended up being my debut at the house was in Götterdämmerung. So that was where I began. But there are lighter roles for sure. I mean, there's the Woodbird and Siegfried, and there's the Rhine Maidens and the like. But even then, they're big voices. They're not like light lyric voices. And I think that's the thing. If you are a big voice, it is okay to go over and sing Wagner. Equally, I think you should wait a bit if you're in your early 20s. It's just one of those things. It's a bit like, running before you can walk, I would say, because it's not just about the size of your instrument. The language has to be correct. It's a style of singing, and you could blow it really easily if you produce that as an audition. It would put people off you potentially where they might be interested otherwise. So I think for somebody in their early 20s or mid 20s, you just be really careful with that sort of stuff.
Yes. And we have a question in the chat from Laurie Duncan, your latest one. Laurie, you can either unmute yourself or I can ask it for you.
Hi. Yeah. So my question is, do you have a favourite opera to sing? And also, do you have a favourite opera to see that you maybe wouldn't enjoy singing in very much? And are they the same or are they different?
What's really weird as a professional singer who's been out in the world a while is that very often, if I like the production, I end up liking the opera more. So it can be a bit production-led, and obviously I have no say over productions. In terms of music itself, it's very exciting to be in Götterdämmerung, I have to say. It's a bit of a long day for me. I get in the makeup chair at 2:30 in the afternoon and I leave the theatre after 11 o'clock at night. Bit full on, but great. Strangely though, I think my favourite in terms of the story, though, and my role in it, I love Madame Butterfly. I love being Suzuki, and I haven't had the chance to do that for a long time now, and I hope it will come around again, because it's one of those things that it's a sort of timeless classic, and people are rude about it, which I never quite understand, because actually in the Munich production, it's the oldest production in the house, so it dates back to, I think, the 1940s, and it looks like a watercolor painting, and it's spectacularly beautiful, and the music's pretty beautiful as well. So I suppose I could be controversial and say it's my favorite, but actually I don't think I really have a favorite. You just have to like what you're doing at any given time, even if it's a production you don't like, and even if it's a role you don't like. So, you know, just have to put your professional hat on. Does that help? Yeah.
Lorraine, thanks for your answer. I have another question here. It's a direct message. It's from Jennifer Hine. Jennifer, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, who's one of my students. Hi, Jen.
Hi. I just wanted to know, as you're already established and you know you've got work coming in, do you have long-term goals that you want to achieve in the next maybe like 10-20 years? Is there something that you really want to do?
When I was starting out, I had, like every young singer, a list of things in my head that I wanted to achieve, and I've either achieved them already or they've turned out to not be very important to me. So it then becomes about just being happy doing whatever I'm doing. So, and I think actually if you took a poll across people my generation and older, everybody pretty much says the same. You get to the point where you feel like you can be happy and fulfilled as long as what's going on around you is an acceptably high level. And I think that's what really bothers me, actually. I don't respond very well to lack of professionalism in particular. Lucky that I'm not subjected to that very often, but occasionally there can be moments of it. So as long as everybody's doing their best, and even, you know, obviously in every performance it might not take off. I mean, we all have days where it's amazing, and then we have days which is a complete nightmare. I've had shows where everything's gone wrong, and I've had shows where I've ended up injured, you know, so you just have to take minute by minute, hour by hour, and hope for the best, I would say.
Oh, lovely, thank you.
No worries.
I meant to ask also, as a travelling artist, and also it's okay to see you've got a daughter at home, Ruby. What's it like travelling when you've got a family at home?
Really hard. I'm really lucky that I've had amazing nannies, so because I'm a lone parent as well, so I bring her up on my own, so that I can't work unless I have childcare at home. But I think if you have the right people there, then it's fine. It's just, it can be really hard. I mean, I've had periods in Munich. I did 6 roles in 5 operas in 4 months at one point in Munich, and she loved it because she got to come for her holidays and all that, but I just was desperate to get home. I've never experienced homesickness quite like it, and I don't think I would ever do it to myself again. But it was really hard. It's that when they presented me this season, that season, and they said, look, these are the things we want you to do, and I looked at them, I thought, I really want to do them all, and it's very hard. I can't really say I don't want any of this. It's a very tricky balance to strike. Equally, it's always been my life, so she's never known any different. But for those of you who are male or female who were thinking about having children in the future, it's not an easy choice as a performer who travels a lot. And there will always be sacrifices, and because I'm unwilling to sacrifice my child and her happiness, therefore I've made some choices professionally where I've turned stuff down that, you know, in another life I would have loved to do, but just can't do everything.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, because I think it's part of the the career as we get older as singers, just to come to terms with how much time we'll have to spend away from home, how many like functions we'll have to say no to, and that's why they say you've got to love it. You're gonna
you really do need to love it, because there'll be times when you really hate it and you can't do anything about it. I mean, I've had times where I've been absolutely miserable as sin when I've been away. You just have to hold on to the fact that firstly you're being paid, and secondly that you can then come home again. I think it's that really. But there's no such thing as perfect. I think that's the other thing. I think people get this weird illusion that the life that I lead is in some way glamorous, but the reality is actually quite the opposite. The traveling can stink. You know, you have to get off a long haul flight and sometimes sing for, well, like one example with the Cleveland Orchestra, I flew to Japan and I had to sing for the Emperor with half an hour's rehearsal, having come off a long haul flight. So yeah, that was great. That's the point though, is that you have to be able to rise above whatever's going on and just put your brain into a space where you do your thing and try not to worry about what other people are doing unless they're getting in your way somehow. So yeah.
Well, thank you for that. We've got another question here in the chat from Helen, but she can't unmute, so I'll read it out for her. What was the biggest and perhaps unexpected shift for you moving from conservatory education into the profession, aside from having an agent? And what advice would you give to someone at that stage?
I was really lucky. Basically, I was kind of offered the Young Artist Programme at the Royal Opera House, but when we sat down to talk about it, they didn't really have anything for me roles-wise. And Scottish Opera, who were then at that point a fully functioning, fully working company with a full season, said, actually, we'll give you 2 years and you can basically be a company principal, but you can be freelance, so you can fit other stuff around it. So I went there instead, and it was all in original language. And it was a great thing because it meant then that not only did I have a full music staff at my disposal constantly, so it meant in terms of preparing roles, I had loads of support. But I was also really fortunate that actually in terms of technically the roles I was given were right. So I did stuff like Mercedes and Carmen and Suzuki and Butterfly and things like that. So it meant that I got all the grounding that I perhaps had lacked a little bit of at college. It's difficult. The Royal College of Music are brilliant at what they do, and they've got a fully working theatre, but what they don't have is where the scale of working in a proper full-sized opera house with a chorus, with a department for everything, with a committed audience that turn up night on night. So it was just finding my feet really. And then when I ended up doing even bigger things, then I hadn't been plunged right in from nothing. So I would say probably my best advice is take every opportunity there is available to you. And another example of that in terms of where it took me was I accepted a charity gig in Bristol when I was, what year was it? Can't even remember, quite a while ago. It was for Making Music, the Association of Music Societies, who I'd won an award from when I was at college. And unbeknownst to me, the BBC were there, and it was as a result of that gig that I was given a place on the New Generation Artist scheme. So you never know who's listening, you never know who's watching. Don't ever turn up to do something if you're not prepared for it. Even in the smallest of places, you'll be shocked who's watching. So put your professional hat on at all times. And I think the other thing, Philip Langridge, who was one of my teachers, always said, the best investment you can ever make is in yourself. And so that's advice that I would always share.
Thank you for that. That's brilliant advice. And thank you for that question, Helen. That's brilliant. I didn't really know that about the concert. It just goes to show how just one thing
it wasn't just determinant on that concert, clearly, but I literally, I was shocked when I realised who was in the audience, because you never ask either, is the thing. And I'm not sure anybody would know if you were to even try and ask. So you just have to go and do your best at all times.
I've done concerts for choral societies where you'd sing Frauenliebe and there'd be some ladies who've never heard that before in their entire life, and some who say it's their favourite song cycle ever. So you just don't know who's going to be there and then
no.
So that's advice.
You can't worry about it either. You have to treat all audiences at the same, which is just be open and honest when you're performing and do your prep, because you can tell when somebody doesn't know the music well enough.
Yeah, and then there's the thing where there's the pressure sometimes to say no to things. Have you ever felt, you've had to make big decisions and maybe say no to things because you've had so many things to do and make those tough decisions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's also stuff that I just don't really want to do, full stop. And that can be any number of sort of reasons behind that. It can be, don't like the conductor, don't like the piece, don't like the place, don't like the orchestra. It depends, Equally, there are organisations and conductors that I would move heaven and earth for if I could. So it's a tricky balance, but you get used to judging it for yourself in a way. But obviously, there's also a mind, you have an eye on, what is this going to do anything for me, or am I at risk? I think that's the other thing. So, if you want to test out a new piece, whatever, you don't go to the Berlin Phil and test out a new piece. So I discovered, because it's that really, isn't it? It's also taking a judgment on whether you're ready for something. And ready doesn't mean what they say at college. I'm not talking really even vocally. I mean, in the round. So for every reason.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you everybody for your questions. There's a few minutes left. So if anybody has any questions and they want to unmute themselves, please go ahead. Otherwise, just thank you so much.
Oh no, you're welcome. I'm just saying who else is here. It's quite funny when I'm now sufficiently old that I don't recognise the younger generation's names necessarily. It varies, so it's interesting. How many are you finding going to Conservatoire, or who are at Conservatoire, moving into the profession and staying there? Is there a drop off, are you discovering in your discussions?
I think only 3 people from my undergrad year have carried on, or 4 people have carried on to postgrad, and I think a lot of people have decided, well, not necessarily a complete break, but a year out because of COVID, just to see things pick up again, which is completely valid. I think it kind of depends, but then there's also seems to be a hoo-ha at the minute as to whether you go for a YAP, the Young Artist Programme, or whether you go to opera school. Obviously, opera school you have to pay more for, or Young Artist Programme be paid. So I think that's been a bit of a discussion among the people who are in postgrad at the minute of what to do.
That's a tricky one anyway, because in my experience, the people that get onto Young Artist Programmes aren't necessarily those that opera schools would be interested in. There's been a few instances where a couple of very, very good singers have not been offered places in opera schools, and I've suggested they go off and audition for Young Artist Programmes, and then they both ended up at major international ones. So I think it really varies. Yeah, I won't tell you who they are because they'll be a bit embarrassed. The conservatoires don't necessarily know what they're talking about all the time. It's variable. And I think maybe the best bet would be to audition for both Young Artist Programmes and opera schools at the same time.
Yeah, that's the plan.
And the National Opera Studio too. Just go for all of it. If you feel ready to sort of approach all of that. Obviously though, you have to take a judgment that's completely honest, because what you don't want is to fall flat on your face in those contexts and then find that no one's interested. So that's a tricky thing to plan as well.
may I ask, like, another, it's quite a personal question maybe, but
Yeah.
being like two northern women and the classical music industry being very southern based, did you feel like you had to make a move to London and in order to establish yourself, or have you always felt, no, this is my root, this is my heritage, and I can work in Liverpool?
I was living in London anyway when I moved over to music. And I was always going to go where my singing teacher was, if I could, which was the Royal College of Music. So for me, it was just serendipitous that it happened to be, at that time, it was the best place to go. I think it swaps around now and again, but I mean, it's still pretty much up there. And the sort of overarching thing once I was out in the profession was that I didn't feel I had to stay in London at all. So I moved to Cambridge firstly, and then I moved back up to Liverpool. And actually the quality of life up here is so good that I can't understand why anybody bothers to live in London, because we only live 2 hours from London on the train. So I mean, unless there's a complete disaster as there was a few weeks ago. In fact, it was the Royal Philharmonic Society Awards the day before the whole West Coast main line went down. So at one point I was driving the whole Liverpool Phil team down to London in my car. Well, that was the plan anyway. It was all sorted, but the reality is that as long as you're near a major airport, it actually doesn't matter where you live. I'd say it was more important to live somewhere where you actually like where you live, rather than worrying about being in London. I mean, I also find that friends who live in London get asked to do lots of really annoying small gigs, which it's not necessarily a good thing. That being unavailable can be a good thing at times. If nothing's going to impact on my career, I don't need to be roped in to do endless sort of small oratorios or whatever anymore. So equally, obviously, the music community in London is massive, and if you're starting out, there's sort of no replacement for doing those small gigs and finding your feet in a major city like that. So it's a tricky one. It varies. It's really difficult to pin any of this down, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for that, and thank you everybody for contributing and asking your questions and for coming today. It's lovely to hear. I know after the pandemic we all had a lot of Zoom, and I know a lot of people think, oh, no more Zoom, but it's so nice to see everybody, some familiar faces, and obviously it's such a privilege to have you here, Jennifer. I know you're very busy and things picking up again, so it's so lovely to have you here sharing your time with us. And
you're welcome. And if all I would say is anybody has questions, then let Lucy know, and I'm quite happy to answer things if they occur to you after the event. It's one thing that's, I would say, is very important, is the mentoring I received from people who had nothing to do with my college education or whatever. They just happened to be colleagues, and I'm in particular very good friends with Sarah Connolly, and she's my mentor really. And I feel lucky that I have somebody to talk to. Equally, you need to find that for yourself. Find older, more experienced people who can just talk through even just the boring things in life, the smaller things that you feel like you can't share with your housemates or your boyfriend or whatever, very often as a career, I mean, Sarah would say she's had people herself as well, so it passes down the line. We find the people whose advice means something. And somebody else that I love and constantly talk to if I need help on anything is Brindley Sherritt as well. So there are plenty of people who are great friends of mine who I know would be, brilliantly generous if asked a question by somebody. And similarly, there are younger singers and younger people who are equally brilliant and never feel afraid to ask, even if it's out of the blue, even if you drop them a message on their websites or whatever, even if you drop them an email via their agent, you'd be surprised how much generosity there is out there in terms of helping the younger generation.
Oh yeah, and that's something we really found throughout the last year with running these events, the amount of times that people have just given up their time, like you today, just to help young people. And while we're on this subject, we're actually running a pilot scheme in the next few weeks. You'll be seeing more about it, but we're going to launch a mentoring scheme. We've got some great names on board. I don't know whether, I'm looking at Izzy now, can we release these names yet or not? She's raising the eyebrow. But
you can.
I think we've got Anush Hovhannisyan, we've got Roddy Williams, Nikki Spence, missing another name.
Tara.
As well.
They're all great.
They're all brilliant.
Yeah.
And you can applications, and it'll be, I think, 3-hour sessions over 3 months. You can talk to them about anything in the career, and they'll be someone you can just lend a helping hand. And
also, Roddy's a composer as well, remember. So if any of you are composers as well as singers, he's the person to talk to. And Brindley, the thing about people like Brindley, talking about people who had a different route in, Brindley and Sarah were both BBC Singers members and started their professional lives as late as singers, so soloists. So interesting. Roddy obviously has composition. It really varies in terms of background of singers. That's why I do research, find out about bigger names, because very often there's more of a story behind any of it than you might have presumed. So it's always worth checking people out.
Exactly. So many ways into this, the great things, the people that you meet along the way. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. We also have another event, I think next week, with Annemiek van Elst, who is a young opera director. So yeah, we'll be releasing the posters for that theme. But thank you so much, everybody, again for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you, and obviously a huge privilege to have Jennifer with us. So thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so very welcome. Have a lovely evening.